If you're going to China, listen to these tips about conversation so you won't embarrass yourself. We will show you just how to do this by taking examples from the 1986 travel memoir Iron and Silk by Mark Salzman, who spent 2 years in China teaching English. Iron and Silk recounts all of his experiences with the Chinese and their culture, and serves as somewhat of a handbook for interactions while in China.
Imagine if you failed on a single job and this meant you lost all of your respect in the community. That is called losing face, and that is why saving face is so important to the Chinese. In the book Iron and Silk, Mark Salzman teaches English to Pan Qingfu, who teaches Salzman Wushu. One night, Pan speaks English in front of Salzman's friends. When he learns that he did a good job, he says, "I was very nervous just then. I didn't want him to lose face." Meaning he did not want Salzman to have failed in teaching him English, causing him to lose his reputation as a good English teacher. Also, when Salzman asks Pan one day, when he is having trouble with a particular move, if Pan wants to stop teaching him, Pan becomes truly upset at Salzman and says, "My responsibility to you is much greater. Just keep this in mind. If you fail, I will lose face," meaning he would lose his reputation as the best wushu teacher in China. In America, we do not have such a strong idea of losing face. We try as hard as we can, but if we fail, we do not lose our respect and reputation.
In Mark Salzman's 2-year visit to China, it was apparent that Chinese etiquette is far different from America's. For example, in Salzman's travel memoir, Iron and Silk, when the Provincial Foreign Affairs Bureau held a banquet for all the foreigners, the audiences did not pay attention. Because of the lack of gestures in their presentations, it made them uninteresting to watch. When Mark exclaimed that he was bored to the man next to him, he said that it was because he was watching and went to sleep. Sleeping, walking around, and talking were the typical appropriate etiquette when attending an event such as this. This was one of the major differences Salzman realized from America and China. When Salzman presented his lecture on the movie E.T., he worried that the audience would dislike it and think that it is childish. Instead of just talking and making it boring, he jumped on the lab table and the audience cheered. Doing this, it entertained his spectators and made it much better than just hearing a dull speech and going to sleep. From this, we can conclude that the Chinese do not feel that it is important to pay attention in meetings, but do like to when it is entertaining.
Eastern country like China, certain cultural differences become apparent. One distinction between the etiquette of the two countries is the reaction to compliments. Salzman experiences this when he is introduced to Teacher Wei, who is a Chinese professor at his university. Teacher Wu presents Teacher Wei to Salzman by saying that she is a very good teacher, but the compliment is deflected by Teacher Wei by saying that she is a really bad teacher. In China, accolades are responded with great modesty and humility, compared to the American response of, "Thank you." Another example of modesty is the time that Dr. Ni introduces Mark Salzman to Little Lu as an English professor, but Salzman denies the compliment and says he's only an English teacher. This particular example shows that Salzman becomes accustomed with the etiquette of the Chinese. Modesty in Eastern culture is a very integral part of their very strict etiquette.
Have you ever been in a foreign country and every conversation around you sounds like gibberish? Well, when Mark Salzman was in China to teach English, he explains in his travel memoir, Iron and Silk, that he had been in this situation many times before. Because Mark Salzman had done his homework before he traveled to China, he knew that when someone had an accent he could not understand, to just nod and smile. This had worked when Mark Salzman had met a fisher named Ding's grandparents, for they had a very strong accent. Also, when he met a man he called Fu Manchu, he could not understand a word Mark was saying, so he just smiled and nodded. This was accepted and advised to do when you are a foreigner in China.
When visiting China, you will find that Chinese people hate to say no when put in a variety of situations. There are two main reasons for this. First, Chinese prefer to discuss sensitive subjects indirectly. An example from Salzman's memoir is the passage in which Mark asked a student of his if he believed the rumor that a woman who committed suicide did so because her boss had been mistreating her for years. The student replies first with, "No one really knows what happened." When Mark asks again, he responds with, "Maybe." The second reason Chinese people hate to say no is the polite Chinese will never turn people away from their homes. For instance, in Iron and Silk, Mark wishes to have his martial arts lessons at his instructor's house instead of his. When Mark introduces this proposition to his teacher, Mr. Gong, Mark writes, "I thought I saw him wince, but he agreed right away and assured me that it would be no trouble at all." Clearly, one must take care when engaging in conversation with Chinese about such matters.